Welcome to Williamson County as we travel around and meet and talk to the different people that have an influence on the things that we do in Williamson County. It's my pleasure as the mayor here to talk with Charles Sargent, a friend of mine that goes back many, many years, our state representative, and has been involved at the local level for a long time. Thanks for being with us today.
Well, Mayor, thank you for having me.
There's lots of things we could talk about in this 30-minute show, but we'll kind of back up a little bit because a lot of people that watch this may not know really who Charles Sargent is and where you come from. I mean, it'll become pretty evident as you talk that you don't have that southern drawl like I do.
No, originally from New York City, but been in Middle Tennessee for 44 years. Lived in Williamson County now for 37 years. Moved here to Cottonwood back in 1977. Always been involved in the schools and the community back then. In fact, got to know you in 1982 when we both sat on the board of the Cottonwood Homeowners Association. But I, along with Clint Callicott and Jimmy Burchett and several of us, started the Grassland Athletics Association back in 79, 80. We only had basketball at the time. I always remember we had 117 boys and girls playing, and now I think the program has several thousand playing basketball and baseball.
Well, let me put it this way. We don't have enough gyms.
I understand.
Well, in those early days, when you're talking about basketball, we were playing ball at the old Grassland Elementary, which is on Bethlehem Loop Road.
Correct.
And right across from Bethlehem Methodist Church, and those Saturdays were filled up. Of course, you were involved in making popcorn and selling candy.
Opened up the concession stands every Saturday morning, 8 o'clock, and went by the old CY Market to pick up the ice because they didn't even have an ice machine up there at the time. So we picked up the ice for the drinks and opened the gym up, and then you'd come along and refereed it several of the games.
All day long. I look back on those days, and our children were involved. Of course, you and Nancy had 2, and we had 3, and there was a great time in our lives. We were so busy. You were in insurance with State Farm, and I was likewise in the insurance with another company, and that Saturday was the time we could really spend with our families. Oftentimes didn't see them but an hour or two, but you were involved, and it was part of putting back into the community. And shortly thereafter, in the mid-'80s, you mentioned Cottonwood Homeowners Association. In a period of time back then, there was a lot of people involved in local politics from out in the Grassland area.
A number of people. You know, when you look back and you think the county commissioner and then became state rep, Clint Callicott was involved in the Grassland Association. Bob Ring was the county mayor from Grassland. We had the sheriff that lived out there for a while in the Grassland community. So you had a lot of people involved in the politics, and most of them all went to CY Market to have their coffee.
Well, even a few years later, a lot of people forget, but you had a state senator there that lived in the area.
Correct.
Keith Jordan.
Keith Jordan was there.
And, of course, Rick Berger was integrated in the system. He was a legal attorney for the law firm here that the county used, the hospital used. So there were a lot of connections back in those days between all of us. And, of course, in the mid-'80s, we got involved in politics. You kind of twisted my arm. We used to get together with a bunch of men and talk. And so the schools weren't what they were back then, Charles. They were, I hate to say they weren't desirable, but they were in great need of many things. One of them was programming, but the other was just school building. There wasn't a Grassland Middle.
No, the Grassland Middle didn't come on board until 1986 because, as you remember, my children were a couple of years older than yours, and I was the first president of the Grassland Parents Club, and started that and started the Parents Club out there. And, there were no football fields, no baseball fields, or anything for a middle school. And
well, and I would hate to get into naming men and women's names that were involved during that period of time, but there was a period of time there that every single year there was 8, 10 more men, more women that got involved, whether it was basketball or baseball or softball. And women's sports was becoming a big thing in the 80s. And of course, your daughter Margaret went on and played at on the Franklin High School girls soccer team. I don't know that she ever lost a game, did she?
They never lost a game the 4 years that she played at Franklin. And I don't think that's ever happened again. They've had some great teams, but they won 4 state championships, 2 before TSSAA even had it as a sanctioned sport. The first 2 years, there was not a sanction. The last 2 years, it was a sanctioned sport, and Franklin was a powerhouse in Tennessee, and they didn't have the divisions. Everyone played in that division.
Well, I got involved in politics. You, a few years followed up, was on the planning commission for Williamson County. You did that several years. We had an opening. Well, we forgot John Hancock, too.
Oh, John Hancock was very involved in grassroots community.
You know, in everything, almost every facet. We wish John a lot of good tidings during this particular time. So he's going through some health issues. But when you think about that period of time, and then the 90s rolled around, we'd had this little company in Murray County that come along by the name of Sargent. Land prices began to escalate. In the early 90s, we had the mall that came on. Jerry Sharber was the mayor of Franklin at that particular time. Many instrumental people throughout Brentwood and Franklin during that period of time. Nolensville was not a city. Spring Hill was just coming on. Thompson Station was not a city. And of course you had Franklin, Brentwood, and Fairview that were really predominant cities.
Correct.
It was very difficult to get to Fairview. In fact, many of the people that watch this show probably remember you had to dial long distance just to call from Franklin to Fairview. And
probably a lot of people don't remember that, but
they put in New Highway 96, which you and I still refer to it. I don't know how much longer it's going to be called New Highway 96, but in those days, to call Fairview, you had to dial long distance. And in those days, that was long before cell phones, it cost you something on your phone bill to call. And so through some legislation up on the Hill, through a gentleman, Dr. Kennedy, many people have forgotten that name,
yes,
was a very successful doctor here in the county, worked over Williamson Medical Center, or referred patients to it, was very instrumental of that. He's still around a little bit. I hear his editorials in the paper from time to time from over in Smyrna, Laverne area. But fast forward again, you got involved in the mid-90s, 96, if my memory serves me correct.
Well, I went on the county commission in 1990.
Right.
And then followed up in 96, went on, became a state rep when Clint Callicott decided to retire. And he was looking at running for mayor in 98. And
well, county executive back then.
County executive at that time. And a number of people asked me to run. In 96, I ran and won that election and been there now for 18 years.
In a long time. You went up there green as a gourd, as they say, in the South. And now you're in charge of, for lack of better words, just the budget department of the entire state of Tennessee, Houseways and Means, and you've done a wonderful job. Charles, let's talk a little bit about the session that ended in 2014. You all, we haven't got enough time on this TV show to explain how you all go back in session, then you break, and then you start over again, but you try to finish them up. Used to be they didn't finish them to May and June, but now they're kind of getting out in April.
We're getting out in April since the Republicans have taken over. They want to go in and get the work done and not just...
Which saves money.
Which saves money. Just us not being there saves us money. Never mind passing the bills that cost money, as far as that's concerned. But back in the old days, they looked at it, and we did not get our financial numbers in until May, and they wanted to wait around to see how much money they were going to have. So basically, they almost could spend it. If not, they would make the cuts necessary to make the cuts. But money at that time was coming in fairly good. So they wanted to make sure they could spend every penny. and we just taken a different attitude now. And
well, the world of computers have helped out. And,
correct.
And the way that you report, same here in the local government. But, you know, April 2014 ended up, there's always bills that were passed that were good bills. There are bills that are passed that are questionable, and then there's some that just didn't quite make it up on the docket for various reasons. They're sent to be studied or to go to an organization called TASER that they're going to study all these. Give us one or two, three of the bills during this last year that finished up that's a good thing for Williamson County. And I know oftentimes you have to look at a 40,000-foot level, looking at the state from Mountain Home up in Upper East Tennessee all the way down to Memphis. And some of those bills really don't affect us, but you still have to oversee them. And they all affect us from a tax structure.
From the tax structure, they all affect us. You know, we just have to go through, and last year was a very tough year. Our franchise excise tax, what we refer to F&E, took a severe nosedive. We were $277 million in the hole. The governor, when he originally did his talk, a state of the state address, wanted to get pay raises. The pay raises for teachers and our state employees was going to run us about $75 million. And after it was very disappointing to everybody, myself included, because I believe we need to continue to give pay raises to our teachers and our state employees. But we found ourselves in a position that we were $277 million in the hole. This was going to cost us another $75 million we didn't have, and we had to remove that off the table. And the governor was very upset about that, but financially we did not have a choice. It's just something we had to do, and yeah, that was one of the disappointments of last year, not being able to give the teachers and the state employees a pay raise. And there were a number of other bills that came, but that probably was, once we said we was going to do it, and we had to retreat on that statement, and that hurt when everyone's expecting it.
A lot of conversation. You've just finished up running on a campaign. You won. You'll be going back in January of 2015. A lot of misconceptions about taxation, the death tax, the Halls tax, all the different taxes that affect us here at the local level. I know personally how vehemently you oppose taxes, but taxes are needed. We're going to get into it a little bit later about our highway. What do we do? But let's talk a little bit about the Halls tax. Let's talk about some of the taxes that are coming off the books, the sales tax, how they're being reduced, but there's a certain level that you just can't go down below.
Yeah, that is true. We were fortunate. 3 years ago, we was able to phase out the elimination of the inheritance tax. Tennessee was a great state to live in, be here, but it was a horrible state to die. Once you died, it was basically a 10% inheritance tax. And so we started phasing that out. We brought the exemption from $1 million to $1.2 million, then to $2 million. Right now it's $2 million. January 1 of this year, the inheritance tax exemption would be $5 million, which is actually equal to a $10 million estate if you're married, because half is just the marital deduction is half the estate. And in January 16, the inheritance tax will be completely phased out. Phasing out that tax is about $130 million in taxpayer savings. So actually, the inheritance tax brought in roughly about $130 million to the state of Tennessee.
And if I could interrupt you and let you catch your breath a minute, it's a great thing to do these things, but you've got a revenue stream that you've been depending on that. It's kind of like when you work, you reach the attainment age of retirement, the normal paycheck that you get is no longer there. Now, you may be eligible for some retirement benefits, certainly Social Security, but that normal paycheck you've been receiving is being cut off. And a lot of people don't realize when you remove $130 million from the year-to-year bottom line, you either got to cut programs, which you've done, or you're going to have to supplement it from some other source out there.
Well, on the inheritance tax, there have been studies, because we looked at the influx and the people moving into the state of Tennessee and people when they reached over 65, 67 with larger states, moving, there was a bigger excess of people moving out, moving to Florida, to Texas because of the inheritance tax. So when we made the decision, we did a lot of studying that hopefully that these people now with the larger states will stay here in Tennessee, pass this money down to their children, their grandchildren, even start smaller business. And so we said over a period of about 5 or 6 years, we didn't feel it would be a net loss on the $130 million, that people will stay here and spend money here, so it would be a net gain after a 5-year period of time. So it was not easy explaining this to a lot of other state reps and state senators, how this was not going to be a decrease in revenues after you looked at it for past 5 years. So that's why we were able to do that. As you know, I've carried the bill for the last couple of years now to do the Halls tax. And that is a double tax to the point that the state receives about $160 million, and the local governments, municipalities or counties, receive about $80 million because it's a split tax. And we're trying to work on a formula to phase that out over a period of years so it doesn't hurt the local communities, and we can absorb it in the natural increase in state other revenues, increase in that. So hopefully we'll have the funds available this year to start phasing that out. It will probably take 6, 7 years, 8 years to phase that out, and hopefully we can get that into a plan. It probably would not go effective until the year 17 tax year, and that way we'll know the full impact of the inheritance tax, because that will be done in 16. So I'm working on that. I had a couple of studies. Dr. Arthur Laffer and I have worked together looking at how this will affect and what the outcome would be on that, doing away with that tax.
Sales tax. Sales tax, we're one of the higher state sales in the nation with a sales tax. Now, we don't have a state income tax, and oftentimes we refer to that as no tax on your earnings. Whatever you pay off to the feds goes to Washington. You do your Social Security and all the other things, but we don't have a tax on the earnings. You nor I or anyone else you can ever think of, very few people. In fact, the Constitution was ratified during the election this year. That'll be put in over a period of time that you just can't do it, which is a good thing. But it also challenges us be sure that our sales tax doesn't get up any higher than it is, because it is quite expensive to buy almost anything in the state, food. And predominantly it's food. There's a cap on automobiles and some of those things you use, but our sales tax has been reduced under your watchful eye also.
Well, this was a big initiative, and I'll give Governor Haslam a lot of credit. For 2 years in a row, he reduced the sales tax on food, not the overall sales tax, the sales tax on food from 5.5%. The first year he dropped it down to 5.25%, and as you know now it's 5%. He dropped it another 0.25%, and Governor Haslam, that was one of his large initiatives to start reducing the sales tax on food.
Session just ended. Had a lot of successes. We won't get into the planning issues, but here in a few short weeks you're going to be traveling back up to Nashville. You and the other state representatives and senators from throughout the state of Tennessee will go back into session. I've got, if I had to just sit here and start pegging, you'll have 1,000, 1,500 bills that'll come through, maybe 2,000 bills that'll come through, but there'll be a handful of those bills that are really going to have to be watched closely. And before we run out of time, let's talk a little bit about our roads, the infrastructure, the transportation. You live here in the Franklin area. as do I. It's almost impossible to go from your home to Nashville and back without some kind of delay, unless you want to leave at 2 o'clock in the morning and 5 o'clock in the morning. But for the most part, traffic is, it's very tough to move around in traffic. We're kind of, and before I turn it over to you from the taxing side, it's important that people that watch the show understand we receive federal dollars. They come into the Tennessee Department of Transportation, and those dollars are used for the most part to fix state and federal roads. Local dollars, although the state does send some matching funds, but your unincorporated area, the rural part of Williamson County, that's run through our highway department. And then each city does their own roads. They could do it. Most cities contract that work out for paving and such as that. Most cities have a public safety department or a public works department that does the sewer and the water and does some of the roads, whereas the county, we don't have a public works department, we have a highway department. So I throw it now to you. I take the basketball and I bounce it over to you. How are we going to solve some of these problems out here, Charles? Because there is no appetite, absolutely zero appetite for increasing taxes on gasoline.
That is a problem we're going to face, or we're facing right now. Our TDOT budget, Tennessee Department of Transportation budget, is roughly a little over about $1.7 billion. We're fortunate, very fortunate here in Tennessee, we do not bond any of our road projects. We are one of the few states what we call pay-as-you-go. We don't write a bond and then build a road and then have to start paying the bond off. Of the $1.7 billion, approximately, you have a federal tax on gasoline, and then you have your state tax. It amounts to right at 40 cents. It's a little over 21 cents for the state and 18 something for the federal government. So it's about a 40-cent tax, and that money comes back to the state and to the counties with a very complicated formula. As you know here, sometimes it's easier to get from Cool Springs to downtown, and we always think of the interstates backing up, than it is for me to get from Cool Springs, say, to West Haven. You have to come through town. You come through town at 5 o'clock. Everyone's getting off work. The traffic backs up. You know, every 2 blocks you have a traffic light or a stop sign. And like you said, there's no will whatsoever to raise the gasoline tax. And people want us to fund our roads with our present revenue. But yet, when I talk to people in West Haven, the major thing they want to see done is Mac Hatcher from Hillsborough Road over to 96 to be completed. And so we know of one road right here that we all like to see completed, but if I multiply that by, never mind the 95 counties, but if I multiplied it by, let's say, 40 counties, they all have. We're several $billion behind on our road projects now. So until we work on a solution, you know, we have cars now getting a lot better gas mileage than what they did 10, 20, 30 years ago. We have our electric cars that are paying no tax to use the roads. We're going to have to figure out how to do that either by mileage or some other way, because they use the road just like a gasoline car, but they're paying no road tax whatsoever. So, you know, is a problem that we're going to have to solve. Is the solution to raise gasoline tax? We're going to have to look at everything. But there's no will at the present time in the state legislators to raise gasoline tax or to raise any type of a tax.
Well, several solutions have been thrown out over the years. I've heard John Schroer, who's also a Franklin resident, who's our Tennessee Department of Transportation Commissioner, talk about how much each of us as individuals spend on gasoline taxes, and that we put back into the kitty, and it's an average about $350 to $400 a person that they pay in taxes for the use of the roads. Now, you got to take into consideration that's children too who don't pay the gas tax. You and I pay that at the pump, or
Correct.
so. But you know, we've talked about transportation. There was issues with buses, with rapid rail, motor pools. I mean, not motor pools, but vans, van pooling, and things of that nature. Because it is getting increasingly more difficult. We can widen the interstate maybe one or two more times, but not much more than that, because you're at the max.
You're at the max on, if you just look at the interstates, when you leave Nashville, leave Brentwood to Franklin, there's no open space to widen the interstate as far as that's concerned. So unless you do an elevated road, and that becomes very expensive.
Well, I would suspect that this is going to be a conversation, I think, because what I'm hearing you say in the 2015 session, a lot of people are going to want to try to help move that into a reality, because the following year, in 2016, is election year again. And it's so difficult, and people know that. You know it, I know it, that on those years that you have to run, nobody wants to be labeled as a person that's going to make a movement of trying to find a way to fix things through taxation.
Correct.
And that's not the purpose of this meeting. There are other ways we can do it, but at the end of the day, it costs money. Asphalt costs more. Gasoline, crude oil right now is one of the lowest it's been in a long time. But we can't depend on that on a long-scale basis of it always being this cost. But we've only got about a minute left, and we could talk. We could talk from now to
another hour with no problem.
And no problem at all, because there's so many things up there. But I want to take a little liberties here as the mayor in Williamson County to thank you and Glenn Cassida and Jeremy Durham, and certainly Jack Johnson, our senator, for the job that you all do. Every single one of you men that represent us up on the Hill are in a leadership role, and you make the job much easier for me to manage, much easier for our city mayors to manage, because of the ability to communicate and just pick up the phone and talk through these issues. So I want to say thank you. I don't always agree with the way you vote, no more than the people out there that are watching this are going to agree with the way that I vote. But overall, I think we've got a wonderful, and we've got a beautiful, wonderful county. We want to keep it that.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think just having open lines of communication with all my constituents, but I work very closely with all the elected officials in Brentwood, Franklin, and with you and the schools, to because you're on the ground every single day. You see it close up, where I may be seeing it from a 20,000, 40,000 foot level, and that's why I rely so much on our elected officials.
Charles Sargent, we got to go. Thanks for being with us. Have a good day.
Thank you.
What should I make my password? Oh, I know. I'll make my password password. Passwords should be unique, private, non-personal, and secure. Use more than one word. Use different character classes. Use symbols and numbers, and use multiple passwords for different sites. And always remember never to share your passwords.